Thank you very much. Because I really want everybody to hear this next panel. They're terrific. So I'm very excited about it. I mentioned the resources. This next panel is about ESOPs in rural areas. Joseph Blasi, Doug Cruz, and Jack Moriarty have a new brief available for the first time at this forum that looks specifically at ESOPs in rural areas. It's among the things available to you. And the analysis shows over 1,600 ESOPs in rural areas covering about 300,000 workers, which is significant. But there is clearly room and opportunity for growth for more ESOPs, cooperatives, and employee ownership trusts in rural areas. Employee ownership trusts, employee share ownership can be particularly valuable in rural areas to address challenges of business closures and associated job loss. And can contribute to job creation, economic development, and community wealth building. So how do we use the tools of ownership to help more rural communities address the challenges they face and build the economic future they want? That's what we're going to discuss next. We have an amazing panel to discuss that. So I'm going to briefly introduce them to you. With us today, we have Daniel Goldstein, Chief Executive Officer, Go ESOP LLC, also an executive fellow with the Rutgers Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing. Molly Hemstreet, founder and co-executive director, the Industrial Commons, another executive fellow with Rutgers. Jenny Levy, executive vice president, People, Community, and Environment, Hypertherm. Michael Williams, CFO, Black & Veatch. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Guo, co-host and reporter for Planet Money and NPR as the moderator for this event. On Planet Money, Jeff tackles a range of complicated topics and issues affecting our economy, breaks them down into engaging and compelling stories. Previously, Jeff covered economics and policy for the Washington Post. He has a bachelor's degree in math and economics from MIT and a JD from Yale Law School. So thank you so much for being here, Jeff, and let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited about this panel today. At Planet Money, we love trying to figure out what makes markets work, and also, more importantly, who they work for. And I feel like we have a fantastic lineup of guests today to help us understand, how can we make markets work for people and for more people, and also for the communities that they live in. And so I'm very excited about this. I think let's get started by, I want each of our panelists to tell us a little bit about their story and the way in which the context of their communities, how that all operates. So maybe Molly, we could start with you. You're based in Morganton, North Carolina, and to tell us your story and also the story of your company in context with your community.
Wonderful, thank you, Jeff. Can everyone hear okay? Okay, great. So again, Molly Hemstreet, and I am from Morganton, North Carolina, which is beautiful southern Appalachia. You've probably heard of Charlotte and Asheville. You might not have heard of Morganton, but we're between the two of those, as many rural communities are. We're between two places that people know. It's where I was born, it's where I was raised, and where I continue to raise my family. I think it's a really wonderful place to be, and I'm sure as we talk about rural communities today, we'll be talking about place, because that is so much of what is meaningful to us and why we choose to stay in our communities and build our companies there. So just for a little context on where I live in North Carolina, it is really the heart of textile and furniture manufacturing, which, yes, is still alive and well, struggling sometimes, and has struggled in the past. This still continues to be one of the largest metropolitan statistical areas of the concentration of textiles and furniture. However, we lost a lot of that work. When I was growing up, we lost about 40,000 jobs in that area. It was one of the highest amounts of job loss that the country saw. However, that infrastructure is still there. And so I walked into this work actually as a teacher, coming out of the public school system saying, wow, a lot of my students' families don't have work. How do we root wealth locally? Which started my journey on this road to employee ownership, was this question of rooting wealth and how do we grow community resiliency. So I started my first company, which is still a thriving cooperative around those three ideas of the 3 Ps: people, planet, and prosperity, with the idea of using employee ownership as a way to root wealth in my community. And then the Industrial Commons grew out of that because I wanted an organization that could give me the things that I never had when we were trying to figure out how someone like myself could stay in our community, how I could create something that was revitalizing for my community, how I could really think about the environmental aspects of how you take a heritage industry and you drive it forward and you create a future for it. So that was really how we created the Industrial Commons. So we have both a 501c3 and a public benefits corporation attached to those. There's several things that we do to promote employee ownership. One is we work a lot with young people, so that the first time that they're hearing about employee ownership isn't when they're in their 20s and 30s or they're ready to sell their business, but they're thinking about it as this idea of stewardship from a very early age. We also incubate some strategic companies that are part of the value chain, because a lot of what we're doing is building sustainability in the textile industry. And then we also look at, as we've all talked about, the silver tsunami, how do we build a saturation of an employee-owned companies that are strategically placed through value chains in our region.
Molly, I feel like you're giving away the whole panel. I feel like you're giving away all our
Pass it along.
secrets. We're gonna get to all of that.
Great.
I'm very excited about that. Daniel, give us a sense of what your company and your companies do, and also the kinds of communities that they invest in.
Sure, but I really wanted to just keep listening to Molly
I know, me
here.
too.
So Maureen, I have to start with the disclaimer that I am recently retired President and CEO of Foliant, so I'm not speaking on behalf of them. I am also serving on the boards of several ESOPs, and I'll bring in their stories, and I am not speaking on their behalf either. I'm speaking to what is available as public information. But so Foliant, the company that I came into, was started in 1883 around the Cedar Rapids Gazette newspaper. There was a question about media before. Happy to respond to that as well. And 100 years later, the families that owned the business started a partial ESOP in 1986. In 2012, it became 100% employee-owned. In 2015, they sold their 62-year-old broadcast business, which meant that the business was back to being primarily a print newspaper as far as revenue was concerned, and that was not a good path forward for the next 130 years. I was brought in and restructured the company into a holding company structure and went to allocate the capital that was generated from the sale of the broadcast business. And this was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I acquired an ambulance manufacturing company in Sumner, Iowa. Small town of 2,100 with 180 employees. That was the major employer of the town. It had started in 1985. When I met the company in 2016, the 75-year-old widow of the founder had no heirs to pass the company to, did not want to sell to private equity or to a strategic buyer, and so it was a very precarious situation. So why would a newspaper company buy an ambulance manufacturing company? Why would an ambulance manufacturer be bought by a newspaper? It was about ESOPs and employee ownership. They knew that if we were investing in their company, in their employees, in their community, that we were going to continue that legacy and continue having that community thrive. After that, we went on to buy a horse and livestock trailer manufacturing company in Chickasha, Oklahoma, about 45 minutes south of Oklahoma City. A larger town, 20,000, but still a significant employer, 125 employees. During COVID, and this would be for a whole other story, that company first fell off the edge of the earth and then exploded. We expanded the company greatly on site and then opened a second location in Manhattan, Kansas, a much larger community, 50,000 people. But these are pretty small communities. These are very important to the livelihood of the employees, their families, to the communities. I did a quick calculation on the boards of ESOPs that I now serve. It represents several thousand employees in 8 different states, and almost all of them are rurally situated. And I won't give away the rest of it. I'll leave some more for Jeff to do afterwards.
We gotta keep some fresh ideas to keep this lovely audience in their seats.
Oh, actually, Jeff, can I just bring
of
in
course.
one other thing? Speaking on what Carrie did, because those of you who know me know that I still am doing this, even though I'm no longer the CEO of Foliance. How do you get the employees to be involved? It's not just about the financial benefit. It's also about having better work conditions, better work lives, getting more engaged, having more say in what they do. And what I came up with at Foliance was, and I'll read it to you, it's the license to act. It's what Carrie and others you're going to hear talk about today. How do you get employees to act as owners, to think as owners, because they are owners? And there's a difference between being the owner and being an employee owner. It's about shared value and having some influence on that shared value. But as you heard earlier, you're not the owner. You're not liable for the bank debt, for the covenants and all that. And we can get into that later too.
Fantastic. So for those of you keeping track, Molly, textiles, North Carolina. We got Daniel, a variety of different things, including newspapers and ambulances. Based in and around Iowa. Michael, let's turn to you and your company and tell us more about that.
Sure. First, pleasure to be here to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about and is for our company as well. So I'm the CFO of Black & Veatch, and we are 100% employee-owned global engineering, procurement, consulting, and construction company. We've been around for over 100 years now, and our mission is building a world of difference through sustainable and resilient critical human infrastructure. So think everything around energy, water, communications, the infrastructures that we all take for granted, that we depend on to be there when we need it, is the areas that Black & Veatch really serves our clients in coming up with innovative solutions that are also sustainable, can really reach the broader pieces of our population. We started as a partnership for many years, and our ESOP employee ownership journey transition happened in '99 to the partial ESOP that we created then, and the 15 years that followed took us to get to 100% ESOP owned, and we made our S Corp election in 2014. And we have over 12,000 employees across the globe, and almost 8,000 employee owners here in the United States. Spread across 67 offices. About a third of those offices are in rural communities. The rest are more in urban environments. And I'd say a little over half of our employees in the United States live in communities that are less than 100,000 population. So not only are professionals and our employee owners that live and work in the communities, but the passion that they bring in employee ownership is also the passion they carry in building a world of difference in the communities in which they live and work every day. But also the work that we're doing really crosses a lot of rural communities across the United States in the work that we're doing in really helping put innovative solutions in place so people can have clean drinking water. We know what to do with our wastewater. How do we capture and solve some of these megatrends that are facing really humanity? From a water scarcity perspective, the energy transition that we're going through that you all hear about all the time, electrification and the impact that has in our aging infrastructure in the United States. And the same issues that have in our urban environments are the same issues that our rural communities are facing as well. And a lot of our clients really touch both, and it's really, really important. And employee ownership, the shared value, the shared accountability that we all have to really share in the success that we create for our clients, but also for each other, really is the critical element, I think, that makes Black & Veatch so special and makes the employee ownership model such a special thing to be a part of.
And Michael, just to double check, you said construction, you said engineering, consulting, nothing related to horses or ambulances?
No horses or ambulances.
Just double checking. Let's turn to Jenny, who is based in New Hampshire. And before you get started, I just kind of wanted to ask, did you get to see the eclipse yesterday?
I was on an airplane coming here, so I left Totality in order to join all of us for this. So
we appreciate your sacrifice. Tell us a little bit more about hypertherm.
Hypertherm, we are located in Hanover, New Hampshire. We were founded in 1968, and that's still where our headquarters are. I'm honored to be representing 2,000 associate owners of Hypertherm Associates. We, at our essence, make machines that cut metal, and the people who use our machines then are building infrastructure, equipment, all kinds of farm equipment and things like that around the world. We also have locations in the United States, in the state of Washington, Minnesota, and New York. But again, our headquarters and by far our largest location is in New Hampshire. Our town has 8,000 people in it. The town next door to us has 12,000 people, and our associates are coming from 4 counties in our area, both in Vermont and New Hampshire, because we're right on the border. And together, those are about 220,000 people that live in those 4 counties across a very large swath of land. So rural, yes, we are. We're the 3rd largest employer in our region. And I think that actually is very connected to the fact that we're an ESOP. The largest is a hospital system, Dartmouth Health. The 2nd is Dartmouth College. And then, believe it or not, the 3rd is Hypertherm, again, with 2,000 people. So we became an ESOP in 2001, partial ESOP, about 30%. And then we became 100% ESOP in 2013. And we also have some international associates who are in kind of a mirrored system to that as well.
Amazing. As you can see, we have a diversity of different kinds of businesses practicing this kind of model, and so that's why it's kind of really exciting to get all these different viewpoints. Next, I want us to get into a conversation about the meaning of this business model for workers, and especially for workers who live in rural areas. And so maybe, Daniel, we can start with you, and can you tell us, just from an employee owner perspective, someone who lives in a rural area, how does that work?
Sure. So, of course, there's the ancillary effect on other businesses in the area, the tax base and all that, but I'm not going to get into that. What's really important is the opportunity that it presents, because we've all seen that there's this drive of sort of immigration from the rural communities to the urban communities, and a lot of that is based on need of opportunity. And what these companies, I'm going to use the Lifeline emergency vehicles as an example. So 180 employees in a town of 2,100. In Lifeline, and actually in all of Foliance's businesses, and I'm pretty sure, I was thinking through all the other companies I'm on the boards of, there are multiple generations of families that work for these ESOPs. That's really meaningful. So you have sons and daughters of mothers and fathers that have economic opportunity. So you're affecting multiple generations. It's also giving the opportunity, there are a lot of people that aren't going to go through either 2 or 4 year university. And this gives an opportunity to learn skills, whether it's on site, whether they've gone through vocational programs beforehand, and then to continue developing those skills. So at Lifeline Emergency Vehicles, Randy Smith is president. He started, I think, 38 years ago as an engineering intern. That's the kind of opportunities that you see across a lot of employee-owned companies. People that start at very low-level jobs and are able to develop and work their way through those opportunities. Also, those technical skills. I was talking to somebody earlier about Industry 4.0 and the investment that's been made. Iowa has been very progressive in that as well. And at Lifeline, they were able to get an Industry 4.0 grant through ARPA funds that were distributed through the governor's office to put in robotic sanding cells. So if you think about an ambulance with a big metal side to it, everybody thinks that an ambulance is for saving lives. It's actually for looking really good when it goes down Main Street under a sunny day on a parade. And there's a lot of cure and that gets into preparing those sides. It's a very manually intensive position or work, which means repetitive injury, soft tissue injury, that affects safety. ESOPs invest in safety, quality. One of those things was getting in those robotic sanding cells. That's upskilling laborers so that they're understanding how to use technology, robots, other things. So there are just so many ways that it allows manufacturing to be cool, which can get people involved. But I'd go back to the most important value that I've seen is those multiple generations. I'll just leave it with this. At the Cedar Rapids Gazette, the sports writer has been writing about Caitlin Clark, has been writing for the newspaper for 45 years. His father was employed by the newspaper for 45 years. It wasn't linear, so 90 years end to end, but that's just two people of one family in one of the companies I'm representing.
And I think what you're saying is really an important point to emphasize, which is the sense of rootedness that can be generated by this kind of model. And so I want to direct that question over to you, Molly, as well. Can you speak to that sense of rootedness and in the place where you work?
Sure, and what we often talk about is building an ecosystem. So, and where a lot of us are talking about manufacturing, which a lot of rural communities are doing, and manufacturing is very important. It tends to have a multiplier effect of 3. For every job you create in manufacturing, you're creating 3 other jobs that are impacted in the supply chain. So it's very important economically that manufacturing can stay rooted in rural communities. So in terms of an ecosystem, I think it's really interesting to look at our ecosystem. So the second largest employer in our community is a weaving mill, Valdez Weavers. I think it's the second largest ESOP in the state of North Carolina. They have been there for 115 years, started by Italian immigrants. They have been there for generations. People have, for generations have worked with them. But what we're starting also are these smaller companies that can rely on them, use their mentorship, and create a whole ecosystem of a company of 50 workers like ours, which is a cooperative of 50 employee-owned, 50 employee owners, to up to 900 workers that are in these the weaving mill. So you start to see truly the fabric of communities that can start to weave together. Pardon my textile puns, they're just rife when you're talking about ecosystems, but they come together and can really build generationally over time. One of the things we do too is a lot of emphasis on a younger generation. So we are also doing apprenticeship programs. We're also looking at a high number of what we have, which are called opportunity youth. These are disinvested youth. These are youth between the ages of 18 and 24. They're not in school. They're not enrolled in, they're not in the workforce. And almost 1 in 5 students are young people in our community are one of these disinvested or opportunity youth. So we are really working hard to encourage those folks to move into employee ownership in these models because it is very incentivizing. And that is really hugely helpful as an incentive to get young people in the door.
I want to follow up on that. So how is that experience for the younger workers? How is that different from working at, say, like a retail chain or a big box store?
So we don't necessarily talk about, hey, you're walking into an employee-owned company. That's not our banner headline.
That's not the pitch.
That's not what we sell. We sell, this is a great place to work. You're going to have flexibility in your schedule. You're going to be able to have training. You're going to see a really cool robotic because that's going to do a really neat process that you're going to understand. So it's really about trying to build that agency for that younger person in order to really engage them to be able to stay in that workplace. And so we see really employee ownership as that through line that creates the culture where the next generation of employees and the next generation, particularly of manufacturing workers, wants to be.
Amazing. Michael and Jenny, I kind of want to open it up a little bit. Could you both just help us understand the kind of wealth building power of ESOPs and the way in which sort of resources and the way that they're allocated, affect the people who work there?
You want me to go first? Sure. I think it's one of the most powerful things about the model, as we've talked a lot about today, and just the generational kind of wealth impact that's created with the ESOP and employee ownership model when it's done well. Since 2014, when we became 100% ESOP, we have paid out over $1 billion of value to people who don't work for Black & Veatch anymore, who work their career. So $1 billion over almost 8,000 people. And that doesn't include the people that are currently working. They're going to get that value paid out. Pretty remarkable when you think about the value that's getting paid out. And as studies would show, and many of you know, the value of retirement for working for an ESOP, would say it's more than double what it is for working for a non-ESOP. And the same holds true at Black & Veatch, when we know how much funds are in our retirement program and how much funds are tied up in our ESOP, it's about double. So that really rings true for us, and that connection, the generational impact that creates, and the connection that brings all of our employees together. We have many employees that celebrate 40, 45. We had 2 that hit 55 years with Black & Veatch, still passionate about the company, and we have a lot of generations where people continue to come, and their sons, grandkids even, are working for Black & Veatch, and it's a truly special thing to be part of and be able to share that wealth with that many people.
Amazing.
For us, I think, and for most, our goal is that people can retire with 10 to 11x their final salary as part of their retirement target. We encourage them to have a 401k, which we also have as kind of a key parallel to this is also. With that, we see people doing exactly that in a way that people have not seen ever in their family generations. Their wealth is often connected to shared resources. Farming resources is very common in our history, in our area. Shared resources that you share with your community and your extended family in terms of extending to help each other during emergencies. You suddenly then have someone in that system that is retiring with $1 million, $800,000, and a number that is unseen ever in their entire family history. So that has tremendous impact. It has impact upon retirement. So we had someone, her name is Peggy, when she retired, she ordered a stretch limo and she had a tiara and she got picked up on her last day and went through the sunroof and waved to everybody, and they did circles around the entire building. Peggy had never been in a limo. That was her vision of retirement, and that's what it meant to her. And then they drove her back to her small town where she lives, and she was just the queen for the day. And that's how she celebrated her retirement. But more, I think, is the stability along the way that I think probably we see in a much bigger, kind of more enduring way, which is that we have a no layoff philosophy. That is very unusual, especially in rural areas. Profit sharing is super common, so we all have that as well. But those stories are more impactful, where we have one associate, Jesse, who said that in his high school, the sheriff came twice to his parents to kick them out of their house because of foreclosures. And then his son just went off to college, and he's able to pay for that first year and a half. He's got that lined up for his son, and he's going to figure that out. So those stories, I think, of that sense of pride, that sense of connection, that sense of stability, yes, that's wealth, but I think there's a lot more to it than that as well for rural communities, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that connection and bigger purpose that we all have, being a part of an employee ownership company, transcends itself into the communities in which we work. So a big part of our mission is how do we really build a world of difference and do that and empower our employee owners to go do that in their local communities and find causes that they're passionate about. And we have a foundation where we will match donations that our employee owners make to charities and community organizations that they're passionate about. So that's a big part of what we do, and having a lot of efforts to go and have wherever our employee owners are, empower them to come up with their own causes and go serve the community and give back is also a big part of our mission.
I want to open it up to all 4 of you. Are there any particular anecdotes or stories from workers that made you think, oh wow, like this is working?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we all probably have a laundry list of them, but
Let's do a quick lightning round. Maybe each of you, if you have any particular stories you wanted to share.
I mean, one that immediately comes to mind, I think, in how our employee owners really act as a family to support each other. Back in 2022, when we had the Hurricane Ian that went through Florida, and we have a lot of professionals kind of all around the state of Florida, but we had over a dozen of our employee owners that band together that were not in the path of destruction. They band together and they drove all around the state of Florida to every single employee owner that had impacted by this and brought them supplies, gave them support, and really were there for them with the cleanup efforts. And they did that on their own doing. And to me, that really speaks a lot to the employee ownership culture and the buy-in, the ownership that they have, not only in the long-term success of the company that they're an owner of, but also their fellow employee owners and how they really want to invest in them and seeing their success as well. That to me is the mark of why that culture is so different than any other company.
Molly and Daniel, any
Sure,
quick
I'll
anecdotes
just
you want to share?
I'll share the story of Walter, who was is the manager of the company that I started, Opportunity Threads, was working 3 jobs until he came to be able to be at Opportunity Threads. He has now successfully run what is now the largest upcycling facility. If we get to talk about the circular economy, we'll talk a little bit about that. He's sent his daughter to college, and now out of this cooperative, there's now a high school fund that other workers can now apply to be sure that their children, many of them did not get to go to college, will be able to achieve a 2 or 4 year degree. So that idea of passing it on, that idea of not just ownership but stewardship, I think is something that we're all really speaking to here.
Yeah, I'll share Ken's story. Every year when I would do a roadshow to do the annual share reveal, I'd bring along somebody who's non-management because nobody really wants to hear from the CEO. They want to hear from one of their own. So it was Ken's 40th year working for the company, and he said, well, why do you want me to go along? And I said, because Ken, you've been here for 40 years. I think people are going to have something, they want to hear what you have to say. Half of our people weren't even born when you started working here. And so what was great about inviting these non-management people is that they'd come up with things that would teach me an incredible amount. So we've heard today already that one of the things that is a problem is that young people, they don't really care about retirement. So how do you get them interested in this? And so while Ken is probably never going to retire, but is heading towards retirement, he came up with something brilliant, which I had never thought about. And he showed some pictures of his family and going on vacations and following his son to baseball and all that. And he said, sure, it's great that we've got this retirement benefit that we're accruing. But what I realized is I wouldn't have been able to do all these things every year this year because I need that retirement fund. And if I had to take that out of my paycheck, I wouldn't have the money that I'd have to take care of my family in the current year. And it really resonated with the younger employees because they were getting it. Oh, okay, so that's actually a benefit that I'm getting today. And while that's not as great as supporting all the others, I just wanted to share that is a very powerful story because it allows people to have better family lives. And so that's really an example of how employee ownership works.
Quickly for us, I mean, during the recession in 08, 09, we were probably about 1,200 people at that time, and our production models had about 110 extra people that we, quote, didn't need for the volumes that we got, we're getting. Our sales dropped in half in one quarter. And what does ownership look like? It is people then mowing the lawns, doing our own custodial cleaning, doing all of our painting. We have a lot of skill sets coming from, again, rural backgrounds, plumbing, doing everything that was needed. So we pulled back on our contracts and no one complained. People were ecstatic to be just in their job with their benefits, producing whatever they could to help the company and offset our costs and basically allow us to endure through that crisis, which we did. And when the volumes came back, they came back faster than they left. We had everybody employed and they were able to start work on Monday. There was no retraining. There was no put the signs back up, beg people to come back. We were fully ready to take advantage of the upswing, better than our competitors. So our lead times were like this. We were meeting needs in the market in a way that other people couldn't because, again, our no layoff philosophy allowed us to endure through that.
And Jenny, I want to follow up on that because I want us to now zoom out and talk about and understand how, get a little bit more macro and understand how these kinds of businesses affect the community, not just workers, but sometimes that is through workers, right? And I want to understand, the policies that you all have put in place, such as the no layoff policy and other kinds of job flexibility policies. How has that affected the workers, but also the texture of their communities and their relationships to each other and to their neighbors and their schools and their PTA overlords?
I think one way that we've done that is through, so for example, you talked about as well about volunteering. So we have a paid volunteering benefit of 40 hours for everybody. And so we serve 33,000 hours in our community. That is a tremendous amount of free work out, especially in rural communities. People can choose how they do that, when and how they want to do that. So that is Little League coaching, that is delivering Meals on Wheels, which I love to do, that is painting houses for low-income homeowners. It looks completely like our 2,000 associates because everyone has a different way they want to serve or a different skill set they want to bring. Our rural community is greatly bolstered by 33,000 hours of labor that's coming out into the community and those nonprofits. We similarly have a foundation that we're supporting, again, nonprofits in those areas. We also host STEM tours for our rural school districts. So in a single school year, we'll host 1,000 students in our doors where we want them to see what it looks like to be an advanced manufacturer. What do robots look like? What does Six Sigma look like? What does lean manufacturing look like? What does that job path and career path look like? And we see that really having a big impact.
And can I ask, why do you do that? Like, who is making that decision, and how are those decisions made to do those kinds of investments?
It's a good question. When you're employee-owned, you have 2,000 people with needs and insights that they bring to their work and all decisions. Our leaders are also owners, so you're all working together, and you really realize that a company is only as strong as its community, and the community is only as strong as the company can be in it. And so how we treat people in our community has a huge impact. As I mentioned in my opening, we're the third largest employer. There are many other employers that could be larger than us, but in downturns, what happens is they move job categories elsewhere. In downturns or in new ownership transitions, the next thing you know, the entire building in Claremont is gone. Everyone in it is no longer working there. But so it's that, I think that connectedness, it's both rural living, but also ownership and being a worker. And we have empowerment to how to make those decisions as well.
Yeah, I want to ask the same question of you, Michael, because I feel like the scale of your companies is humongous, right? But you're also dispersed among all these different communities. So help us understand how this works on a bigger scale as well.
Yeah, it certainly brings different challenges, right? We can't get our whole company together in one room. But we have not only the broader culture of our organization that we have, but we have an ambassador network of employee owners that have their own culture locally, that create that sort of family environment and are part of something bigger, part of a larger organization, but also are part of something where they, fellow employee owners that they're working with each and every day. So we try to really double down on that. We also really invest in bringing the work that we do, that people don't have a chance to go out in the field and see what we do. We try to bring that to them in a lot of ways to really kind of, again, help fuel this broader purpose of what are we doing and what's the impact that we're making, not only in our local communities, but in the broader world as well. So it's something we spend a lot of time, a lot of energy. Communication is critical, celebrating successes together, transparency in how we're doing, what's going well, what's not going well, really giving testimonies about, a lot of conversation about what does it mean to think and act like an owner. So we spend a lot of time as well talking about that, people sharing their stories of, how it's really the collective choices of thousands of people that really drive our results together. So.
And how have you noticed that changing the relationship between the company and its all the different cities where it operates? How's that different from, a company that isn't employee-owned?
Yeah, I mean, I think we play on a big team. We have a large family of owners, and I think even people that they've never met, maybe face-to-face, still feel like they're part of a family, and they're willing to help out and support. And a lot of the teams that our employee owners are working on, they're working with people all across the United States and even the world in many cases. But there's one thing that binds everybody together, and that's that every single one of us owns a piece of the company, and we all have a shared ownership in our mutual success together. And that is a common bond that brings everybody together. And that I think is special in how people invest back in the company, how they invest in developing talent, how they invest in building relationships, how they help each other out. When people need help, other people run to help them. We have a saying in our company of run to the fire. And if there's something going on, that's the culture we want of, hey, we're all owners here, how can I help? And that's something that you see day in and day out in our culture.
Molly, I want to turn to you. So we're going to take a trip to North Carolina now. Help us understand. I want to congratulate you. I think you all got a pretty significant grant recently. So tell us a little bit more about that and your relationship, the impact of the work that you do and the work that your workers do in their local communities.
Sure, happy to talk about that. And I know there's a panel coming up on supply chain, so I won't try to dip my toe into supply chains, but that is so important when you are in manufacturing and you're looking at localized production. So many of your efficiencies come from supply chain. So we were very honored to be selected as a National Science Foundation engine. This is money that's coming out of the CHIPS and Science Act to put forth these regional hubs that are really driving innovation. And there were 10 engines chosen. And we are the region that is the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. The first allocation is for $15 million, but it's up to $160 over 10 years, which is to really build out in our region sustainability and innovation, and particularly circularity for the U.S. as a model for textile circularity for the U.S. So it's a huge opportunity because at the end of the day, we have to be sure that even though our companies are strong and their cultures are great, it is all about the markets in which they can be competitive. Textiles has always really struggled in the U.S. as things have been offshored. That was kind of what I lived through as a child growing up in my community. So there's this opportunity for really greening the textile industry and creating sustainable jobs that are good green jobs. And so it's really interesting that the companies that are the anchor for the textile innovation engine are these employee-owned companies, because they're able to see the innovation, they're able to work collaboratively, they're able to be nimble. So I don't think it's, there's certainly a corollary there between who's leading innovation and who's leading workforce development, and the intersection of those things in order to really bring money in and then also drive innovation out. And so what we're looking at seeing is the marriage of the innovation, the market potential, and the ability of the workforce to be responsive. So employee ownership is a real through line on the innovation engine that we are developing along with the National Science Foundation.
I want to follow up on that because, there's this thing that economists like to talk about. It's called learning by doing. And one of the arguments for reshoring, right, is that there's a lot of innovation that happens on the factory floor that when you send it overseas, you don't get to reap the benefits of that. Your competitors do, or your subcontractors do. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about how the work that people are doing, how that is contributing to innovation for not just your own company, but for I guess the industry as a whole?
Yes, so I do think, we've talked about the pandemic a little bit, and all we needed to see is like how unprepared we were. We were all trying to figure out how you make masks and gowns. Interestingly enough, it was a lot of the work in North Carolina that was able to be responsive in order to create testing that could come onto the market quickly. So the interesting idea with the National Science Foundation, and we really applaud them for thinking about this differently, is not just funding research that will stick in universities, but being able to pull that down to the factory floor. And the workers that are most ready to take that on are these workers that have been in a culture of agency that is often promoted by employee ownership. So I want to create that direct line between innovation and employee ownership and workforce development, because that is really how we will build resiliency in an economy like ours that has often struggled, and that we can be quick. You were talking, Jenny, about how quickly you were able to respond to the market once you were able to get back. You didn't have to put the signs out and put things on Indeed. The workers were ready to come back. And so whenever there's innovation, we need to be able to move quickly. And the challenge is moving quickly in complicated supply chains. And so that's what we're looking to do with the innovation engine, is to really marry research and development and workforce development, and then move that through commercialization through our plants.
You don't have any sort of textile trade secrets you want to share? I'm sure we could keep it a secret.
No, I have to turn something in between. Well, that's an interesting idea between like IP and collective knowledge. And we're going to be trying to figure that out. Like, what do you share so that the businesses can succeed? And then what do you collectively own as a group and as an engine and as a region as you try to create this identity around sustainability? So we're going to be working on that. I'll let you know if we get it figured out.
Daniel, I want to turn to you. As you were describing, right, the work that you have been involved in, it made me think about how communities have nucleuses, or many different nuclei, anyway, right? And those are very important. And the more of those that you have, the stronger a community becomes. And it made me think of, newspapers are a nucleus for a community that a community can form around. Ambulances, the people who save your lives, is also a nucleus around which community can form, right? So can you tell us more about that? Just help me out and riff on that idea for a
Sure.
bit.
Yeah, absolutely. At sort of the highest level, the macro level, each of the companies has a purpose. So the media companies, it's informing communities. And so, for example, Cedar Rapids likes double calamities. So in 2008, there was also this massive flood. In 2020, besides COVID, we also had a derecho, which just devastated the community. And the newspaper immediately responded by getting homework and other information out, because there was no broadcast media. People didn't have electricity, they didn't have internet. And so that's one way they get out into the community. We've heard about very generous corporate giving to charities and philanthropy, and also giving of time. That's building community. The purpose of ambulance, obviously, saving people's lives. Of the trailer company, it's creating family memories. But again, I want to bring it down to sort of the individual level, because what I heard from a lot of during COVID is that the companies were probably the safest place where the workers were in their lives, with all the uncertainty that was out in their community and their life. And there's also the personal growth that the employee owners go through, which does spill out into the community, because then they bring that as better parents, better partners, better leaders in the community. I'll share one quick story. It was an employee at our Oklahoma trailer manufacturing plant who said that he had gotten an offer in Oklahoma City that was $1 or $2 more, and they sat down and walked through, okay, how much is your transportation cost? How much time are you going to be away from your family? What's the benefit of the employee ownership, which you haven't calculated into this? And at the end, he was sort of deflated and said, okay, yeah, I get it. It's better economically, but I'm just not doing what I want to be doing here. I want to be advancing. And Ben, the president, looked at his attendance policy and said, you're not showing up every day. And he went home, and he came back the next day, and he went to Ben and said, can I talk to you? And he said, I looked myself in the mirror and I said, I need to be a better version of myself. So I'm going to make that commitment to do that. He's now a lead. He's going to be a supervisor soon. He's said that he's become a better husband, a better father. And don't overlook those things, because most people in rural communities are not getting that kind of development. And they are getting that in ESOPs, because ESOPs do care about developing their employees. So that's a really important connection as well.
That was an amazing story. So thank you for sharing that with us. I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end for this illustrious group to pepper you with follow-ups. But before we get to that, this is DC, so we have to talk policy at some point. Can't just be anecdotes, even though I'd love to live in that world. So I want us to. Why don't we go down the row, and in 60 seconds or less, could you all give me a sense of what are concrete policy solutions that can, that would benefit this kind of model, just drawing on your experiences?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think continued preservation and protection of the S Corp ESOP model, I think is one of the most important things to do, and all the benefits that brings ESOP companies, I think, is very critical to the sustainability long-term of ESOPs being able to exist into perpetuity and continue to create this generational flywheel of wealth. So that's an important one, and all of the legislation that may inadvertently sweep in S Corp ESOPs, I think, is important to just to keep that top of mind. So I think that's definitely one that we have to keep educating and spreading the message, and then just like we've said earlier, just awareness and education on what the model is, how it works, its viability, and being a really valuable ownership structure and a way for owners to transition that ownership that may want to leave. And I think the more we can do to make that easy, make that really enticing for those looking to transition for ownership, the easier we can make that, I think the more of these you'll see and the more successful the model can become.
How about you, Jenny?
I am not a policy expert, but I will say that the thing I wish for the most is that this remains a nonpartisan, bipartisan, pan-partisan, non-everything issue. There is no one that can disagree with stability in communities. There's no one that can disagree with, again, every worker is an owner. They are voting, sure, but they are completely individual, and they're trying to do great work together. You just cannot argue with that sustainable growth, that sustainable investment in communities. Yes, rural communities, great, but also urban communities, any community, and that is inherently nonpartisan. That's how we lead as well and think about it. So just that criticality, that this does not get pulled apart in one direction or another, that's the most important thing in my mind.
Caution to stay from the new and shiny, and so I would often challenge the economic development authorities in my community. When you attract a new business, all you're doing is you're stealing our employees. And so please stop doing that. What you need to do is give the economic incentives to gain and maintain competitiveness of existing businesses. 180 employees working for 39 years in a town of 2,100 is worth preserving, and they need that assistance, the Industry 4.0 assistance, because otherwise they're not going to be able to compete with the larger companies. So that, and I also want to touch back on something that Carrie mentioned, because I know it's something that's near and dear to my heart and Leslie's and some others, which is if we could get ESOPs to be recognized with the same preferred status as minority and women-owned businesses. It's locally owned, it's addressing income and wealth inequality, it is addressing a lot of issues that we just need to get ESOPs to have better recognition as that preferred spend.
So I would agree with everything that's been said, and also the nonpartisan sense of this. I come from North Carolina, it's a very purple state, and so it's very important that particularly catalytic, that's funding that has come down, like the NSF engine funding continues. That is only good until there's funding and reallocation that comes forth again. We can really make our region transformational over a 10-year swath with this resources coming in, but we need that money to be allocated again and again. That will allow communities like ours that have been persistent poverty communities really hopefully have an opportunity to get out of these boom and bust cycles. And so I think continuing the funding for many of these programs that we're seeing get traction, that have, employee ownership models and lines through them, but also resiliency, climate resiliency models. And I am really thankful for our Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who has supported us through all of that. We need to keep it nonpartisan, and for the funding that has worked, we need to keep it flowing into our communities.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much. I feel like it's time for questions. We have about 15 minutes before we release you all to get your calories, your delicious calories.
So we can maybe start with a question from our virtual audience, since we haven't gone there yet.
Fantastic.
Sometimes there's this narrative out there that ESOPs create this trade-off between contributions to the ESOP and raising wages. So I wonder if any folks for the ESOP could help dispel that myth a little bit.
I can speak to it a little bit, but I should let the CFO get to this. I think one thing that we go through when we're educating, for example, external directors on our board and community members, even new associates, is an ESOP is an enclosed system. When you have eliminated an external shareholder, your owners are your workers, and then the other people in the equation are your customers. Who are you doing business with, and suppliers too, but at the most fundamental level, customer, owner, worker, and if those two are the same, the owner and the worker are the same, it really clarifies things in a really important way. With that said, yes, you can increase wages, but then that shifts your profit profile. It also shifts your security through shocks and downturns. If you increase wages, that's a major cost driver. So then you think about the valuation of the business for the ESOP. Then you think about what's left for CapEx. Then you think, so it's an enclosed system. And so we want to optimize that entire closed system at all times, which is how as a management team we're constantly working through that, I should say, and keeping that all in balance. Because the owner, there's not an owner that says, I need a new yacht to go buy. That doesn't exist. It's the people who work there as well. And they have the short term in mind, the medium term, and the long term. And wages need to kind of work in that type of horizon.
Well said. I don't think I could top that. But, you know, I think it's an interesting balance, and same thing. I mean, it all has to work in a circle. And we are a people business. Our only asset is our people and our talent. And we live in an environment where there's a massive shortage of the talent that we need. So we have to be competitive in our wages to attract talent. We're not going to be the highest probably, but we're not going to be the lowest. We've got to be competitive, but also educate new talent on the power of why coming to work for an ESOP is so important. And what is the wealth that you're going to create working your career at an ESOP? What are all the diverse career opportunities you're going to have by working, and what's a differentiator in our culture? Are the things that really draw and attract people here. It's not just the wages, but certainly it all is impactful because the cost of wages impacts, you know, the price we have to charge our customers who are also constrained on their capital that they have to put out there, but also impacts profitability, which drives the value of all of our ownership accounts. So it all has to work in concert, but you know, certainly we aim to be competitive in the labor market that we have.
Thank you all so much. I've maybe 1.5 comments and questions. One of the issues that came up in this panel more so than others was the role of community. And so it's not just like the individual, you're also contributing to the community. And I think that that's such a helpful message, especially for this broader coalition building, because many of the challenges that we're facing, especially with the emergence of Gen AI and the concerns about technological displacement of workers, is ones that communities will have to deal with. There could be national strategy, but communities will ultimately have to reconcile, here's where my labor force is, here's where we need to go. And so I wonder if you could comment a little bit about how, like building bridges with other communities beyond it being I mean, income inequality is a big enough issue already to build a coalition around, but then you also, I think, have tons of allies in the social capital space. Congress before had the JEC on the social capital project that Mike Lee was running, and so I'm just curious, have you already been thinking about alliances with that side of the, like I guess the social capital community building facet of the research and policy communities?
I mean, maybe, so for me, I think sectorally, like I think about the sector that we're in. And so for us, it's really thinking about how do we build a strong sector? And that has a lot of tentacles, from the businesses themselves to the private sector, to the public sector, to the governor, down to the, you know, the manufacturing networks, to the alliances. This is why the language around ecosystem fits so much better for me. And so the first thing that I was thinking about when I was listening to your question is like, what I think is so important about ESOPs and cooperatives is this idea of governance, that we are relearning democracy in our workplaces. I think you said that. We're relearning being in school. We're relearning what it means to train it. We're relearning what that means in our workplaces. And that's what we ultimately have is we learn how to be on a board. We learn how to have our voice heard. We learn how to have our voice heard and then not get what we want, which is more important, you know, particularly in places right now. So I think there's something about the deep level of participation in the companies that we're building and the ecosystems that we're building and their cross communication is that was what really where the strength of social capital comes from. And I like, again, just the ecosystem words, and this is really the work that we did early on with the Aspen Institute about the multiple forms of wealth. So really seeing social capital as a form of wealth that we need to hold deeply and map out and understand and pass on within our ecosystems. And when you have the generationality of wealth, then you start to have the generationality also of those social ecosystems and that social capital as well. So that's my shot at it, but we'll see.
I'll add again, bring it down to the personal level, something that follows on from what you said, Molly. So the learning and development that we offered at Foliance, a lot of it is just around simple communication. And so giving positive feedback, detailed feedback, appreciative inquiry, open-ended questions, things like this. In manufacturing, it's just, there are more men than women, so there are more men that go through this, and we were doing this 2-day session to start it off, and so part of the homework was use some of this. Well, where are you going to use it? You're going to go home. And so every time we get these stories of these guys that would go home and start asking open-ended questions or giving good communication back to their wives, and their wives saying, "Who are you?" And so it's funny, but it's also, it's developing different traits that are brought out into the community. And so I think all of us encourage that community activity. I would encourage our executives to take board positions, whether it's on nonprofit or for-profit companies, to get more executive development. You see ESOPs always out in the community doing community cleanup, supporting charities, matching donations, all of that. So it does become a fabric of the community.
I'll maybe add one very small, quick example. So, that gets to the social capital part. We found that we needed to be, and we're committed to being, a recovery-friendly workplace. And that's because we had an associate die from overdose. We have so many grandparents raising grandchildren due to losing their children to substance misuse. And that, I think, at a fundamental level is a company recognizing that you need to change your contract with workers, and you need to change how you think about where people have been and what they're bringing to you, and then also how to manage. You were talking about absences earlier. You know, well, why are you absent? What does your LADAC say? How do we work through this? Where are you in your recovery journey? So that you are very aware. Again, no surprise, New Hampshire and Vermont, we have a major opioid misuse crisis. And unfortunately, it's on the rise again. But I think a company, you need to think about that in your social contract as well. It's not just an extraction mindset. It's a partnership, as you say, a kind of a building shared value and social capital. It's just one example of that, as you were asking that.
Great question.
Hi. So not all ESOPs are created equal. There are obviously different percentages of ownerships within various ESOP structures. Do you find that there are differences in the way they operate depending on that percentage of ownership? Do they act, feel, react similarly or differently if it's 20% or if it's 100% from your experiences?
So I have been with companies that have been partial ESOPs that have made the transition to 100% ESOP. And I'd say that it really comes down to the education and not the percentage. And one of the biggest issues, coming back to, it's sort of a mantra of mine, it's about shared value, not shared control. It's getting people to understand the difference between shared ownership and being the owner, and whether that's at 20%, 30%, 50%, or 100%, it's really the same. And how they can use their license to act to affect what happens every day. Certainly when it's 100%, it's a more credible sort of thesis to say you are the only owner and not that you're sharing it with somebody else, and not getting into the mechanics of S distributions and dividends and other things that sort of mess up the calculation. So it makes it a clearer picture, but I think it really just comes down to that education and the communication with the employees as employee owners and what it means to be an employee owner.
think we have time for another question.
Hey, Julie Mentor at Transform Finance. So in the previous panel, we were talking about how do we grow this field, and I'm struck that a few of you at least operate more conglomerates, or it was interesting to hear about the media company acquiring an ambulance company. I'm curious how you think about existing employee-owned companies acquiring other companies as a way to transition them in terms of helping with the culture change and kind of maybe the financing, if that's easier. So curious if that's a strategy that you all think about and if it's something that you think should be adopted more broadly.
I'd love to jump into this one because so when we were looking at the trailer company, the owners wanted it to be employee owned, but they were very concerned that the management would be distracted by learning how to run an ESOP, which is not a small thing. And so they really liked the idea of plugging into a holding company structure, and we are not the only ones. Chris, you're going to hear from later today, they're doing the same thing. There is an advantage to being bought by an employee-owned company to become employee-owned as opposed to going through that journey on your own. And you see a lot more employee-owned holding companies and a lot of M&A that's happening. I'll also say now that I'm no longer involved with Foliant, so it's not self-serving, that I think there's going to be more consolidation in the ESOP space because smaller ESOPs have a great onus on them, not just to worry about their business and succession of their business, but succession of compliance issues, knowledge of the ESOP and sustainability. And if ESOPs get together, I think that there is an economy of scale, and this is not the PE economy of scale with a carve-out. It's a multiplier effect that we've seen, and again, you'll hear from Chris and others later. So I do think that there is going to be more of this happening in the ESOP space.
Yeah, I think it's a great strategy. It's a great model. I think it's one that's going to be necessary to sustain the ESOP model. Like you said, smaller ESOPs. But finding the right fit is probably the biggest challenge, right? Of finding that company that the cultures really will jive, or someone that, you know, depending on what their ownership structure looks like and what their challenge is, how does that fit in the context of making two ESOPs come together? So there's complexities there that I think people shy away from in terms of how do we merge two valuations, how do we deal with the trustees, there's those sort of things. So the more we can get better at how do we make that more seamless, I think the more that's a really good strategy to sustain this flywheel of employee ownership, because I think it would not do the model any favors if we kept having a lot of ESOPs sell out completely. You might get short-term wealth for the people who are currently a part of that ESOP, but you're losing the future flywheel effect of that wealth that gets created by having that ESOP continue into perpetuity. So I think it's a great strategy, and one I think collectively as a community of ESOP practitioners and professionals, how we can continue to make that easier. It's good.
Is it like the Borg from Star Trek? Assimilate, join the collective? Is that how it works? We'll work on the marketing for that. I think we are out of time. Thank you all for joining us. Don't want to stand between you all and our lunch here. And thank you again. If we could get a round of applause for our wonderful guests.